In the pantheon of stories that society tried to bury, books, it burned, films, it banned, names, it erased from respectable conversation. There is one title that refused to disappear, a title that was prosecuted in courtrooms across 3 continents. A story so dangerous to the moral establishment of its time that governments, post offices, and customs agents worked in concert to make sure ordinary people could never read it. And yet, 50 years after D.H. Lawrence first put pen to paper in a Florence villa, the world was still arguing about it. By 1981, that argument had moved from the courtroom to the cinema. This is the untold story of how one of literature's most scandalous novels became one of cinema's most controversial films, and how a Dutch actress who had already changed the world once was asked to do it again. This is the making of Lady Chatterley's Lover, 1981. To understand why this film mattered, you first have to understand the book that made it impossible. D.H. Lawrence was a man born in contradiction, the son of a Nottinghamshire coal miner, raised in the grime and roar of industrial England. He grew up to become one of the most sophisticated and most despised literary minds of the 20th century. He wrote about what polite society refused to name. He wrote about the body, about desire, about the human cost of a world that had traded its soul for a factory chimney. A villa in Florence, Italy. Because no British publisher would touch it, he privately printed his final novel, Lady Chatterley's Lover. The story was, on its surface, simple. Lady Constance Chatterley, young, beautiful, full of life, married to Sir Clifford, a baronet left paralyzed and impotent by the Great War. A man who can give her everything the aristocracy promises, except the one thing a body cannot live without. And so Connie finds it in the arms of Oliver Mellors, the gamekeeper, a working man, a man below her class, a man very much alive. Lawrence meant it as a meditation on vitality versus sterility, on the industrial machine versus the human heart, on what England had done to itself. The authorities saw something else entirely. The United States Post Office confiscated copies circulating through the mail in 1929. A Boston bookseller was arrested, fined, and jailed simply for selling 5 copies. The novel was banned in the United States, Canada, Australia, India, and Japan. In the United Kingdom, it took until 1960, 32 years after the book was written, for the full, uncensored text to be published openly. And when Penguin Books did so, they were immediately prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act. The trial became a cultural earthquake. The chief prosecutor, in one of history's great moments of aristocratic obliviousness, asked the jury, "Is it a book you would wish your wife or your servants to read?" The jury, which included 3 women and a cross-section of working-class men, burst into laughter. Penguin won. 3 million copies sold immediately. The poet Philip Larkin later wrote that sexual intercourse, as a public matter, began in 1963 between the end of the Chatterley ban and the Beatles' first LP. The book had survived. The story had survived. And by the time 1981 arrived, Hollywood was ready to turn it into a film. The men who decided to bring Lady Chatterley's Lover to the screen in 1981 were not, by any stretch of the imagination, the men you might expect. Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, Israeli cousins who had seized control of Cannon Films and were in the process of reshaping low-budget American cinema through sheer relentless productivity, acquired the rights and immediately reached out to a director they knew could handle the film's most essential requirement, making desire look beautiful. That director was just Jaeckin, a Frenchman, a fashion photographer turned filmmaker. The man who, in 1974, had directed a relatively unknown Dutch model named Sylvia Kristel in a film called Emmanuelle and accidentally created one of the most profitable films in French cinema history. Emmanuelle had been seen, estimates suggest, by somewhere in the region of 300 million people worldwide. It had played continuously for 15 years in a single Parisian cinema. It had made Jaeckin famous and Kristel iconic. It had also, in both their minds, become a cage. Jaeckin wanted to be taken seriously as a filmmaker. He craved the respectability that had eluded him since Emmanuelle had made critics dismiss him as an elegant pornographer. Lady Chatterley's Lover D.H. Lawrence. English literature, real prestige, felt like his way out. Sylvia Kristel felt exactly the same way. Sylvia Kristel, the woman behind the image. She was born on September 28, 1952, Utrecht, in the Netherlands, to parents who ran a hotel near the railway station. A childhood, she later wrote, defined by transience, faces that arrived and departed, nothing permanent, no one who stayed. Her father left when she was 14, walked back into the hotel one day with another woman, and evicted his wife and daughters. "I am a divorced child of divided, uncertain background," she would write decades later. She left school at 16, worked as a typist, began modeling, won Miss TV Netherlands and then Miss TV Europe in 1973, and then through that European beauty-to-camera pipeline that defined an era, found herself on the set of Emmanuelle. Emmanuelle made her famous. It also, she felt, made her invisible. "I have lent myself," she wrote in her autobiography, "rented myself out, but never given myself. I wanted to be looked at, and that's all that ever happened." Lady Chatterley's lover, in Sylvia Kristel's mind, was different. This was Lawrence. This was literature. This was a real woman with an interior life, not just a beautiful face in an exotic setting. She said publicly, "Just Jaeckin and I have been persecuted by this soft porn criticism. I don't want to go through the same nightmares I did after Emmanuelle." The irony, of course, was that the film's producers were banking on exactly that association. Yoram Globus told the press, "We are not making an X-rated picture. This will be a cult film. Nudity depends on how you shoot it. Art, commerce, desire, legacy." The three of them, Jaeckin, Kristel, and the Canon machine behind them, were pulling in different directions before a single frame was shot. And before filming could even begin, the production was hit by one of those off-screen dramas that sounds almost too strange to be true. The role of Oliver Mellers, the gamekeeper, the man at the center of the story, the soul of Lawrence's vision of working-class vitality, had originally been offered to a British actor named Ian McShane. Here's the detail that changes everything. Ian McShane and Sylvia Kristel had a history, a personal history. They had been in a relationship, had lived together in Los Angeles, where McShane had promised to help launch her American career. McShane accepted the role and then withdrew from the film. Why? Because his wife objected to him shooting intimate scenes with his former girlfriend. The role went instead to Nicholas Clay, a British actor with an earthy, physical presence and a willingness to commit to the role's demands that few reviewers would later dispute. Clay would go on to make the film's most impassioned performance. Critics who dismissed almost everything else about the production often singled him out as its most credible element, a Mellers who felt genuinely of the earth, genuinely alive. The irony of McShane's exit is the kind D.H. Lawrence himself might have appreciated. A story about desire and class and the complications of passion derailed, even before production, by desire and the complications of passion. Filming began in the English countryside, with production designed by Anton Furst, the man who would later win an Academy Award for his work on Batman, creating the film's lush, estate-bound world. Cinematographer Robert Frace brought a soft-focus visual language that would define the film's look, a palette of warm light, mist, and shadow that recalled the golden photography of classic European art cinema. Costume design was handled by Shirley Russell, who brought period authenticity to the 1920s English upper-class setting. The film's score was composed by Stanley Myers and Richard Harvey, a gentle, melancholic orchestration that tried to lend the material the gravity of tragedy rather than the lightness of titillation. The production also attracted a supporting cast of surprising quality. A young Anthony Stewart Head, years before he would become known to millions as Giles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, appeared in a small role. Bessie Love, a silent film star who had been nominated for an Academy Award in 1930, also took a part, lending the production an unexpected link to cinema's earliest history. But on set, the tensions that existed before filming had not resolved themselves. Jaeckin was trying to make a prestige drama. The Canon machine needed a commercially viable product. Kristel was trying to prove something, and critics who heard about the production were already sharpening their pens. Ken Russell, the flamboyant British director who had himself once considered adapting the novel before losing the rights, delivered his verdict before seeing a single frame. "Unless the director has turned over a new leaf," Russell said, "Lady Chatterley's Lover is going to be a glossy, facile romp in the woods, romp after romp after romp." He was not entirely wrong. But he was not entirely right either. When Lady Chatterley's Lover, 1981, finally reached audiences, it delivered exactly what many expected, a visually elegant adaptation shaped around mood, atmosphere, and Sylvia Kristel's quiet screen presence. The film succeeded in capturing the loneliness of Constance Chatterley's world. Its countryside settings, restrained pacing, and emotional tone reflected the spirit of D.H. Lawrence's original novel more faithfully than earlier versions. But not everything worked. Critics noted the storytelling felt cautious at times, holding back from the deeper psychological tension that defined the book. Compared to Lawrence's bold themes, the film often chose subtlety over intensity. Still, Kristel's performance gave the film its emotional center thoughtful, restrained, and unmistakably human. Upon release, the film attracted attention across Europe and international markets, largely because of Sylvia Kristel's reputation after Emmanuelle. For many viewers, she remained inseparable from that earlier role. Instead of being seen as a literary adaptation first, Lady Chatterley's Lover was often viewed through the lens of Kristel's past success. This shaped expectations and sometimes limited how critics evaluated the film on its own terms. Even so, the movie found a steady audience and strengthened Kristel's image as one of the defining screen figures of European cinema in that era. Today, Lady Chatterley's Lover, 1981, stands as more than just another adaptation. It represents a moment when classic literature and European art house storytelling briefly met mainstream international attention. The film also marked an important turning point in Sylvia Kristel's career, showing her determination to move beyond a single iconic role and explore more complex characters. Decades later, it remains a fascinating chapter in retro cinema history, a quiet but lasting reminder of how controversial literature continued to shape film long after its original publication. If you found this deep dive into cinema's history valuable, please consider subscribing to Retro Cinema, History, and Icon Biographies, where every week we uncover the untold stories behind the films and figures that shaped a culture. And if there is a particular film, a particular icon, or a particular chapter of Golden Age cinema that you feel deserves its own documentary, tell us in the comments. Your suggestions genuinely shape what we make next. Thank you for watching.